Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel that takes you deep inside the San Francisco 49ers. I am your host, Jack Hammer. It is time to talk about Trey Lance and the 49ers. It is time to break down everything that went wrong in this relationship and go through it, find out what happened here between the 49ers and Lance. You know, obviously the 49ers, there was a big investment here, and they have a lot to answer for. The team didn't address anything with the media yesterday. The news broke just before practice in Santa Clara yesterday afternoon that Sam Darnold was going to be the backup quarterback for the 49ers. On the way out to practice, we were told that we couldn't tweet from the field. That didn't happen. Everybody, once we got out there, realized that Trey Lance wasn't on the field, and the tweets started flowing. After practice, instead of having John Lynch or Kyle Shanahan show up to the podium to talk, to address the questions that all of the media had, they sent Javon Hargrave, a guy who was brand new to the team, up to the podium, followed by Fred Warner, two defensive guys who had, one of them who had no idea what was even taking place. And instead, Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch have spent the last 24 hours working through their flagship station, KMBR, who, this is no offense to KMBR. They do the best that they can in terms of covering the team. They have a vested interest to not say certain things in their broadcasts, in their programming. So you're not going to get the same questions from the radio host at KMBR or any radio station or station period that has a vested interest in a team, whether it's the 49ers with KMBR, the Golden State Warriors with 95.7 The Game, the Sacramento Kings with 1140 up in Sacramento. You name it, that's the way it works. And instead of addressing the media and having to answer questions, they chose not to. And so let's go through it. The one thing that I will say about this, and Matt Miyoko hit it on the head with a piece that he wrote earlier today, was that by the 49ers not coming out and answering the questions, what they've done is they have opened themselves up to everything and anything that people want to say about them. Now, do they care? I think there is some amongst the organization that do care about the messaging that comes out. That's not I can say for a fact that is the case, because if you say certain things, they're going to ask you why you said that. They're going to get, there's things that happen with that. And, just looking through this now, let's get into it. Why is Trey Lance? What has gone wrong here? The 49ers took Trey Lance 3rd overall in the 2021 draft. And, there's going to be a lot of speculation, a lot of talk, a lot of people saying that this is the worst trade in the history of the San Francisco 49ers organization. That's not necessarily wrong, especially if you're of the younger generation, and the fact that it was 3 first-round picks for a quarterback that didn't work out. But, if you're a little bit older, you do a little bit of searching on the history of 49ers draft picks or trades. The trade for Trey Lance, the trade up, I don't know if that could be the worst pick in the history of the 49ers. I think the worst trade in the history of the San Francisco 49ers has to go to what they did in 1978. Bill Walsh was the head coach, and they traded for O.J. Simpson. Actually, he wasn't the head coach at that point. This was before Bill Walsh got there. Bill Walsh got there in 1979. So the season before Bill Walsh showed up in San Francisco. The 49ers traded for O.J. Simpson, a washed-up running back at that time. He was no longer the guy who had ran for 2,000 yards and all those types of things. They went out, tried to make a splash, and they sent their 2nd and 3rd round picks in 1978 for O.J. Simpson. Doesn't stop there. They also sent their 1st and 4th round picks in 1979, plus a 2nd rounder in 1980 for O.J. Simpson. The 49ers got more out of Trey Lance in terms of the victory that he gave them helped them too in week 17 of the 2021 season against the Houston Texans than the 49ers ever got out of O.J. Simpson in that trade. That's the worst trade in the history of the 49ers. But the Trey Lance deal, you look at this and the selection of Lance, third overall, that was supposed to represent the future for the San Francisco 49ers. It's what made a lot of people in the fan base very excited. It was a signal off of Jimmy Garoppolo, and you got to remember there's a vast number of folks, very vocal group of folks within the 49er fan base who didn't like Jimmy Garoppolo. So the possibility of getting Jimmy Garoppolo off of this team was the best thing that could happen for them. And what ended up happening, though, is that it hasn't worked out. And that future, I think, ended to a certain extent on Wednesday when the report surfaced that Lance is not going to be the backup to Brock Purdy. Instead, it's going to be Sam Darnold. And we went out to practice on Wednesday afternoon. And not only did we have that news, but Trey Lance wasn't on the field. So, let's go through this. Let's try to unpack what went wrong and go through it. And I will answer your questions. You give me a good question, we'll make sure we get it answered. If you want to even call into the show, let me know. I will put the link in the side and I can take call-in questions from some of you guys if you would like. And, let me start by before I get into the questions, you guys can go ahead and fire away your questions over there. I will get to them. When you look at this team, let's go through first off, before I get to the questions, where I think things went wrong. Number one, let's look at Trey Lance, the player. You look at Trey Lance, and he was a raw talent, right? This is a guy who had all the traits that you would look for in a franchise quarterback. Trey Lance, big, strong, smart, really good arm, can make those throws down the field. The problem here, though, and the reason why I make sure that I'm highlighting raw talent is when you looked at Trey Lance as a prospect, this is a guy who in high school threw just 99 passes as a quarterback. Then went on to North Dakota State, where he threw only 318 passes over the course of 3 seasons. He was at North Dakota State from 2018 to 2020. Now, a big part of the reason why the attempts were so low for Trey Lance was, hey, everybody remembers what was taking place in 2020, right? COVID impacted that season, took away the football season for Trey Lance at North Dakota State in 2020. That was one of the 1AA FCS level of the NCAA. Decided not to play football during the fall of that season because of everything that was going on with COVID. And so Lance declares for the draft, and now he's going to miss a whole nother season. And despite knowing all of that in terms of the lack of attempts and the lack of playing time for Lance, the 49ers went ahead, pulled the trigger. And you look at what they did. They tried to take the pressure off of Lance early on by saying publicly that they weren't going to have a quarterback competition between Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo. But there was. As 49ers general manager John Lynch said before the 2021 preseason opener against the Chiefs, Lance had started strong in camp and was pushing Jimmy Garoppolo. Then the 49ers went down to La Jolla, had joint practices with the Chargers prior to their preseason game in week 2 of that season. And things were a little bit rough for Lance, but they went into the game, and Kyle Shanahan had Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo split series to open that game. Garoppolo got the first series, Lance got the second series. The whole reasoning behind doing that was because these two were in a competition. And already, like I mentioned, and what John Lynch had said, the 49ers were in the middle of a quarterback competition. They just didn't want to label it that way. Neither of the quarterbacks, if you remember, played well. Lance was unable to take advantage of that opportunity to show you that he was the better option. And that's why they went right back to Jimmy Garoppolo. Well, kind of. They didn't totally go back to Jimmy Garoppolo, because during practices the following week, that's when the 49ers unveiled the whole 2 quarterback system, right? That 2 quarterback system where they were rotating quarterbacks in and out in the middle of series. If you remember that game against the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo was on the field, then all of a sudden Trey Lance would trot out, and then Garoppolo would come back in, and then Lance would come in, and they went back and forth with that for that third and final preseason game in 2021. So they still were of that mindset that they were going to try to push Jimmy Garoppolo with Trey Lance. That was the whole reason. If you feel like Jimmy Garoppolo was your guy, if you felt like Trey Lance was your guy, you ride those guys and you would stick with them. You wouldn't be doing the flip-flop if you felt like you had one guy that could do everything for you. It's clear they didn't. That system carried into the first week against Detroit. If you remember, Lance actually came on in place of Garoppolo on the team's opening drive, threw the first touchdown of the season on a little throw to Trent Sherfield on the left side, a little quick out, got the touchdown. But after that, apart from one snap against Green Bay a couple weeks later, the 2 quarterback system was completely shelved. Never saw it again the rest of the year. And, again, this is just where I see this whole thing playing out in terms of the raw talent of Trey Lance. He just didn't have enough time for what the 49ers needed. And I felt when the draft was made for Trey Lance, I've been open about this. I felt like the pick should have been Mac Jones because I felt like Mac Jones was the most ready to play quarterback. My feeling at the time was they were looking to replace Jimmy Garoppolo, and they wanted a guy that was going to step in right away that season. And so that would have meant going with Mac Jones. Instead, they went with Trey Lance, and that's fine. I like Trey Lance as well, not as much as Jones. I thought that Lance was a raw prospect that had some really good things on tape. I felt like he had some things also that weren't so hot, and they were really going to have to work with him and take some time to develop him. That's why rolling into 2021, when he didn't win the starting job, I didn't have a problem with them rolling it back a little bit and saying, we're going to let this guy develop on the practice field, away from the games. We're going to go in that direction. And ultimately what ended up happening was the next thing. And this is, I think, where things really went wrong, because there's been a lot of speculation about the 49ers have mishandled Trey Lance. They haven't given, and the mishandling of Trey Lance is the belief that they didn't give him a fair shot. And I disagree with the fair shot. I just went through, I think, the first part of why I disagree with that. The other reason that I disagree with it is injuries. Injuries have robbed Trey Lance from the time that he got to San Francisco. Well, not quite from the time he got to San Francisco, but that's been the number one thing that has slowed down Trey Lance's development here with the 49ers. People want to say Kyle Shanahan can't develop quarterbacks. He can't. It's hard to develop somebody that can't play. The same people that will tell you that Trey Lance was not developed by Kyle Shanahan will be the first to tell you that Trey Lance was affected by the fracture that he received on his index finger of his throwing hand during the preseason finale at Levi Stadium against the Raiders, when he went to throw a pass and hit his hand on the helmet of a Raiders defender. Now, remember, Lance didn't miss any games, but that definitely had lingering effects for Lance. And if you believe everything that's been said by Lance and the 49ers in this offseason, this is something that carried on not only throughout 2021, but also impacted him at the beginning of 2022. And this is what Trey Lance had to say last May when it came to the finger. I think the finger for me was the biggest thing, just as far as throwing the ball. I kind of had to learn to throw the ball differently without kind of using my pointer finger, because of just where I was throughout the year. But now I feel like I'm in a great spot health-wise and throwing the ball well and feeling really good. Now, remember, that's what Lance said in May of last year, May of 2022. Now, this offseason, as we were ramping up to get into the offseason program, OTAs and minicamp, during those early media sessions in Santa Clara, the finger was brought up again by the 49ers, by Kyle Shanahan, and by the media as to part of the problem. And although Trey Lance himself said that he was fine, feeling better, felt like he was in a great spot going into last season, there's still a group of people who felt like that hindered his performance during training camp in 2022. I don't know. The player here is telling you that he feels great. Told you he was in a great spot. Now, beyond that, you get into his rookie season. He has the broken finger. Jimmy Garoppolo goes down in week 4, just before he goes down. He doesn't come back out for the second half. That opens the door for Lance to finish off that game against the Seattle Seahawks. He makes his first NFL start the following week against the Arizona Cardinals. As you would expect of a rookie quarterback making his first start on the road against a team at that time, which was pretty good in Arizona, he was predictably up and down throughout the game. But I think the bigger issue was what happened during the game. It wasn't necessarily that he played poorly, because I don't think he really played poorly. I think he was, as I just said, up and down. There was some good, there was some bad. There was some good and some bad from other people that also contributed to that loss. And the bigger issue, though, was a knee injury that he suffered at some point in that game. Now, remember, the 49ers ran him a lot in that game. This is something that we can come back to. Remember, they ran him a lot in this game. Now, that injury to Lance then forced the 49ers to rush Jimmy Garoppolo back following the bye week 2 weeks later for their next game against the Indianapolis Colts. If you listen to what Kyle Shanahan said around that time, he mentioned that he was bummed out about the injury to Lance against Arizona because they had some plans for him. And I think the plans were that they wanted to continue rolling with Trey Lance now that door had been opened with the injury to Jimmy Garoppolo. It opened the door for them to let this kid get some reps and play, but they couldn't because he was injured. Beyond that, you have the game week 17 of the season. Garoppolo out again, injured his thumb on that Thursday night game in Nashville. Trey Lance came on, struggled throughout the first half until the last possession of the half when there was about 2 minutes to go. Led a nice drive to get the 49ers on the scoreboard. And from that point on, he played much better throughout the second half. The 49ers were able to defeat the Houston Texans and keep their season alive going into week 18 down in LA. And then it was back to Jimmy Garoppolo. You can move fast forward to 2020. Last season, Lance was given the keys to the offense. The second-year quarterback, again, throughout training camp was up and down. Don't take my word for it. That's what Kyle Shanahan said. Kyle Shanahan, when I asked him what he felt or how he felt about Trey Lance's performance in training camp, this was on day 10 of training camp. I asked him how he felt about Trey Lance's performance up to that point. Kyle Shanahan said there had been some good, there had been some bad. And that's pretty much the way that I felt about it as well. Then you get to the season opener in Chicago. This is going to be the third career start for Trey Lance. And unfortunately, Mother Nature didn't want to cooperate. Sunday dawned and the skies opened up and it rained most of the entire day in Chicago. It lightened up a bit for about the first 3 quarters. Early in the fourth quarter is when it really started downpour again. You look at the TV copy and you can see in the fourth quarter where it opened up again because all of a sudden you couldn't see the field. But it had been rainy throughout, but there were still some really nice plays by Lance. He made some really good plays. He had some bad plays, just like he had during training camp. And then, the 49ers were down by 1 score in the fourth quarter. This is when the rain had just started to fall now. And he throws an interception. And that led to Chicago scoring just a couple plays later and going up by 2 points. The downpour ensued. The game was over. The 49ers 0-1. Then they come back to Santa Clara the next week against Seattle. Lance led a scoring drive to open the game. They got into field goal range on the following possession, and that's when Lance had that ill-fated run around the right side and was hit. Ended up suffering a broken ankle when he was tackled, and just a really bad break for a guy who ran a lot in college. You watch that play. I don't think it was a bad play call. Josh Allen runs that quite a bit for the Buffalo Bills. Jalen Hurts runs it like crazy for the Philadelphia Eagles. Daniel Jones of the New York Jets, he runs the ball quite a bit like that as well. Those are plays that all 3 of those guys run often in between the tackles. And, the problem here for Lance is that his season was over less than 5 quarters after it started. And for a quarterback who we have already talked about being a raw talent, who needed to play in both games and practice, the injury is devastating because it's one thing if he was just missing the games, but he wasn't able to get anything. He wasn't even able to get the reps during practice. And there were some comments made by John Lynch on the radio today in KMBR in which he stated that Kyle Shanahan and the coaching staff had not tailored the offense around Trey Lance during this training camp. They had kept the offense the way it is. What's interesting about this is the response that has generated. Now, the thing when it comes to the 49ers not tailoring the offense around Lance was, think about this for a second. When Trey Lance went down, one second. You're wrong. They run it a lot. They run counter bash, which is the play that the 49ers ran in which Trey Lance was injured, a lot. And they ran it, I think, in the Super Bowl even. Now, the deal, is the same people who complained about the 49ers utilizing Lance are now complaining about the 49ers not tailoring their playbook to Lance during this preseason, during this training camp. Again, why are we having this argument? Number one, if the 49ers had done it, they'd be utilizing him as a runner, which you all complained about when he got hurt. Right? For those people that didn't like the runs from Lance and were complaining about the runs, all of a sudden now the 49ers tell you that they weren't tailoring their offense around Trey Lance. They were trying to make him a pocket quarterback, which is what everybody really was saying that they should do, that they should take away the quarterback runs, or the majority of the quarterback runs. Everybody was saying, give Trey Lance the Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy playbook. Trey Lance was given the Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance playbook in this training camp. Now, before I go further, I want to say one thing about Trey Lance. I feel that Trey Lance's performance in training camp this year was the best we've ever seen of him since he joined the 49ers. He had spent the entire offseason working with Jeff Christensen, and it was clear that Trey Lance came out and he was a different player in terms of his ability to make throws around the field. All of a sudden, a guy who couldn't throw a deep out the year before. I mean, if you go back to training camp in 2022, Trey Lance struggled massively hitting deep outs. He got out there this year and he hit that on a regular basis. And it's unfortunate. I don't agree. I don't agree with Sam Darnold being the backup quarterback because I don't feel like he was the best quarterback on the field when it comes to the backups. Make no mistake about it. Brock Purdy's the best quarterback on this roster, but Trey Lance was the second best based on everything that I saw. And I was at every practice, was out in Vegas, was at the games, watched them play, broke down the film here for you guys. And frustrating a bit to see that go down yesterday. I don't know exactly all the details. Kyle Shanahan made his decision, and that's the direction that they're going to go. Now, moving forward, when you look at this, the other part is you have to look at Brock Purdy's role in what's happened with Trey Lance. From the moment Purdy took over, after Jimmy Garoppolo went down with an injury at the end of the 49ers' first possession against Miami, it was clear that Brock Purdy was different. The final pick of the 2022 draft went out, and he did what the 49ers had always hoped they were going to get from Trey Lance from the moment that they drafted him. What Brock Purdy did was he went out and performed like the third pick in the draft. He blew everybody away. That's why he was the big story. That's why people were talking about him the way that they were on the national level, even. Because he went out, he blew everybody away, and he left no doubt who the best quarterback was on the roster. Not only do they do that against Miami, he came back, he did it the next week against Tampa Bay, did it the next week against Seattle. He did it week after week after week, including 2 playoff wins, one against the Seattle Seahawks, one against the Dallas Cowboys, to get into the NFC Championship game. And we know what happened there in terms of the injuries. Purdy's emergence is what changed everything. Because if Brock Purdy doesn't emerge, if Brock Purdy doesn't step up and play the way that he did last season after Garoppolo went down, we're looking at a completely different scenario of what's happening at quarterback for the 49ers. It's no longer a competition to see who the backup quarterback is going to be on this team. It's a competition to see who's going to be the starter, or they just go right back to Trey Lance again. I don't know. There's been talk about, I think, the possibility that the 49ers were not sold on Trey Lance going all the way back to 2022 in the beginning of that season. I don't know. It seemed to me like they were. And I think when you look at what's next for Trey Lance, I think that's where things change a little bit, because when you look at what's next for Trey Lance, this is a tough one because San Francisco sees Lance as an asset. The quarterback is coming off the best offseason of his career. And if you look at the reports, the 49ers were offered a 5th-round pick for Lance before the draft. They didn't take it. Now, the asking price for Trey Lance, have the 49ers decided they're going to lower it? Are they now going to take lower than a 5th round, or are they going to even take a 5th round? I think it's going to be hard for a team to now come to the 49ers and say, we'll give you a 5th-round pick for Trey Lance now. I know we offered that to you before, and you didn't take it, but we'll offer it to you. If a team did that, would the 49ers take it? I don't know. But, I mentioned earlier, John Lynch, general manager of the 49ers, went on KMBR this morning. He was asked about this whole situation. This is what he said. John Lynch said, I think that's the most likely option, is that he's here. If we can find a landing spot for Trey that is really good that's a really good one for him and works for us, that's not something we turn a blind eye to, but that's not where our focus is right now. Yeah. If that sounds familiar to you, it should. San Francisco spent nearly all of last offseason saying exactly the same thing about Jimmy Garoppolo, only to have Garoppolo return. Remember, they never gave up on his contract. He was always under contract, but they were able to restructure his contract in order to bring him back as the backup to Trey Lance. On top of that, it's very similar to what John Lynch said about Trey Lance before the draft, when he said there hasn't been a lot of smoke, or that there's a lot of smoke, I should say. Excuse me. That was a misspeaking on my part. There weren't a lot of people knocking on their door. That's why the 5th-round draft pick was the best option that they were given. 49ers weren't just going to give away Trey Lance. They needed him. They wanted to get something of value, and I think they still see a value in having Trey Lance on their roster. I also think the 49ers see the distraction that it causes. Not so much within their building, because within their building, as one of the things that I can say is offensive and defensive guys, they spend time together, but it's not like high school. It's not even like college. These guys are they're laser focused in on their jobs. They work together as a team when they have to, but they're also lasered in on what they have to do. So a linebacker or a defensive back isn't necessarily going to be right there in lockstep with what's happening at the quarterback position. Not the way an offensive lineman or a receiver or a running back or a tight end might be. We'll see what happens. I would be surprised to see the 49ers just give up on Trey Lance. I think if I had to lay a bet down, My bet would be that Trey Lance is on the 49ers this season. That's my feeling on it, is that Trey Lance will still be here. I've said that throughout this offseason. One thing that I did say, go back to the channel on March 12th, I believe it is. I said then that if the 49ers were going to trade Trey Lance, that a trade for Trey Lance would come at the end of training camp. It would come once they knew that Brock Purdy was healthy, once they felt comfortable with their backup quarterback positions. If they felt like they had everything else locked down, they might trade Trey Lance at that point. But the thing is, you look around the league, who's going to trade for Trey Lance right now? I've heard some interesting scenarios involving a player coming back to the 49ers. I've heard names like Danielle Hunter, defensive end for the Minnesota Vikings. I've heard Montez Sweat, defensive end for the Washington Commanders. Chase Young, the defensive end of the Washington Commanders. And I have to ask, why would a team that feels like they have a chance to do something this season trade a player away that could help them win games this year, maybe even make some noise in the playoffs, for a guy that's going to be a backup quarterback on their team? Kirk Cousins is the quarterback. I understand the Minnesota piece, because Kirk Cousins is under contract next year. Danielle Hunter is under contract next year. Well, if that's the case, why didn't they just trade away Kirk Cousins right now? Just give up on the season. Danielle Hunter is a very good defensive end. Don't get me wrong. He's a big piece of their team. It would be a huge addition for the 49ers. But why would a team give up somebody that is going to help them win games this year, especially a team that feels like they have a chance to make the playoffs, and then who knows what happens once you get there? And that's the case, I think, with Minnesota, with Hunter. And I think it's the same thing with Washington. If you look at Washington was a really good team last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Defensively, they were a very good defense. They were one of the best defenses in the league in 2022. The problem that Washington had was they had a North Dakota State quarterback by the name of Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is awful. Carson Wentz has been awful since he got injured in his second season, when he was playing really good the year they went to the Super Bowl, the year that they won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. Ever since that point in time, Carson Wentz has been not a good NFL quarterback, and that's the reason why Carson Wentz is at home now. So we'll see how this all plays out. I think this is a really good one from Rashad Shirazi. Says Tennessee makes sense. Tannehill is old. Levis and Willis seem like busts. I haven't seen enough of Will Levis to say that he looks like a bust right now. I haven't watched any of their preseason games. But just from the standpoint that Rand Carthon is there, that one could make sense. He knows Trey Lance. He was in San Francisco when Trey Lance was drafted. He knows more about him. Maybe that's the case. Yes, Levis is a rookie. But although Levis is a rookie, at the same time, Willis is only in his second year, and he was a second-round draft pick. The Tennessee Titans spent more on Willis than they did on Levis in terms of draft capital. So, but Tennessee would make some sense. I think that's a good spot. Somebody mentioned Tampa Bay recently to me. I think it was Larry Kruger mentioned Tampa Bay. He had mentioned a player coming back to the 49ers that I don't think Tampa Bay would be willing to do that. But also Tampa Bay is not, I don't think Tampa Bay is in a position like Washington, and it's quite in that same position as Washington and Minnesota. They're a team that could possibly get into the playoffs, but they're not going to have a shot once they get there. I don't think. Maybe Baker Mayfield comes out and surprises everybody and turns back into the Baker Mayfield that led the Browns into the playoffs that one season. Had a really tight game with the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City before losing. I think that was in the second round of the playoffs that year. I don't know that, but I think Tampa Bay might make some sense there. It's just I'm interested to see how this plays out. And in terms of locations that he's going to go, some of, like I said, some of the trade scenarios, 49ers giving up Lance and a pick for these really good defensive linemen. I don't think they make sense from a football standpoint. Just kind of looking through, and here's the other thing. Did the 49ers mistreat Trey Lance? Big Nick Wright, all of a sudden he's the voice of reason for 49er fans. Nick Wright, who in his comments on this couldn't even get right the number of games that Trey Lance has started in San Francisco. Couldn't even get right the number of plays that Trey Lance ran in the game before he got injured against Seattle. Same guy who most folks around the Bay Area laugh at most of the time, but all of a sudden he says something that plays to some of their emotions, and all of a sudden he makes sense. It doesn't make sense. Nick Wright doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't be mad at Nick Wright for saying what y'all are scared to say. I think Nick Wright's full of shit. I don't think the 49ers mistreated Trey Lance. Trey Lance wasn't good enough to beat out Jimmy Garoppolo. Trey Lance got injured. Trey Lance was going to be the starting quarterback for the 49ers in 2022. He got injured five quarters into the season. At what point did the 49ers mistreat Trey Lance? They gave him a chance to win the job as a rookie. They gave him the job in year 2. And then in year 3, if you want to say that they mistreated him this year, I won't argue about that. I think that Trey Lance has been better than Sam Darnold. I think that he has. I've straight up said that. But beyond that, the 49ers, the problem that the 49ers ran into, the problem that Trey Lance ran into, as I said, was that he came to a team that was ready to play. And 49ers took a big swing to get a quarterback, 3rd overall. Didn't work out. They then caught a break the following season and were able to pull out a guy who I think has the possibility to take them places. 49ers Empire says, I don't like Nick Wright, but him sticking up for Lance was refreshing to hear. I mean, you want media to keep tanking his stock? Well, here's the thing. I believe that there's been a group of people in the national media that have been overly harsh on Trey Lance, especially this offseason, which is the reason why I asked Kyle Shanahan the question that I did last week during training camp. I asked him about his thoughts on some of the over-the-top things that were being said about Trey Lance. Now, if we're going to talk about anybody mistreating Trey Lance, it's not the 49ers. The people that mistreated Trey Lance are the people who got pissed off because they were wrong that the 49ers were going to be drafting Mac Jones. Guys like Michael Lombardi, he has an axe to grind because he was wrong. On that whole thing. Same thing with Colin Cowherd. Everybody knows that there's an axe to grind with Colin Cowherd and Trey Lance. It's not that hard to figure out why. That's easy. Am I still friends with Grant? I think I am. I don't know. I sit next to him every home game. Sat next to him on Saturday night. We talked. We talked at practice a couple days ago. Most days we talk. Some days we don't because we're busy. I like Grant. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the help that he gave me to get started. I have nothing against him. And as far as being friends, I consider him a friend. I haven't been on his channel because I'm not able to commit to a time because of what I've got going on. And so I haven't been reaching out. I never reached out to, I had reached out to him to get on. We did some shows together and then my schedule was whacked out. And so couldn't make it work. I take shots at 49ers content creators quite often. I don't consider Grant a content creator. Grant's a journalist. So when I'm talking about 49ers content creators and some of the wacky takes that they have, it's not about Grant, although I don't agree with everything he says. Right? I don't have to agree with everything he says to be a friend with somebody. I hope he doesn't agree with everything I say. If everybody agreed with everything I had to say, we'd have a problem because I'm not always right. Most of the time I am. Kidding. But I feel like I'm right. Right? It's okay, you know, and if he doesn't like what I have to say, that's okay. He can tell me. Just like I would tell him if I don't like something that he says or anybody. You know, at the end of the day, everybody that's doing this, if you're a journalist covering the team, that's one thing. There's, I think, 4 of us on YouTube that cover the team on a day in and day out basis that are in Santa Clara. 3 of us that write for the team, write about the team. And when I talk about content creation, I'm not talking about David Lombardi and Grant Cohn. Just make sure that that's out there. Beyond that, you know, again, I don't think the 49ers that the 49ers are in the wrong here in terms of over the time, the entire handling of Trey Lance. I think if you want to say that handling Trey Lance and the firms are wrong about that, I think you're taking a side and you're not looking at the full picture. There's a lot that goes into both sides of this. There's a lot that goes into it. And I went through the injuries, went through the levels of play and those kind of things. And we're going to find out what's going to happen next. Again, John Lynch saying on the radio today, Kyle Shanahan actually said it last night, that he expects to play Trey Lance tomorrow night. That will be quite interesting if Trey Lance suits up for the 49ers for the final week of the preseason after what happened yesterday. It'll be something to keep tuned in for. Always drip 805. Explain this, Hammer. Why didn't Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch? Why didn't Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are cowards for not facing the media to explain themselves and take accountability for their mistakes? I addressed that a little bit ago, but I'll address it again. I feel like they took the easy way out here. Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, they knew what was going to happen. The entire 49ers PR staff knew what was going to happen the moment we hit the field. And the reason that I know that is because as they let the media through the gates to go out to the practice field, the PR person that let us through the gate said, remember, there is no tweeting from the field. Now, we've been doing this the entire month of July. Not once did anybody from the 49ers PR staff say that as we're walking out there. Now, they had told us in an email before the first day of practice, you're not supposed to, all those types of things. Well, they knew that what was coming. They knew that Trey Lance wasn't going to be on the field. That's why they didn't want us to tweet. The 49ers knew what was coming. John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan chose not to get out in front of it by coming out and talking to the media after practice. At one point in practice, John Lynch was on the field behind the 49ers offense. He called the 49ers PR director onto the field to talk to him. They were having these conversations, but they felt like the better course of action was to send Javon Hargrave and Fred Warner to the podium and then cut it off. Normally they send 3 guys after practice. Normally that's what we get. They sent 2. I felt sorry for Javon Hargrave. Javon Hargrave, he was like, I didn't even practice today. I don't even know what's going on. I just showed up. Javon Hargrave was at the podium for less than 2 minutes because nobody had a question for him. That wasn't fair to him. Just like it wasn't fair to bring Fred Warner to the podium. Fred Warner, is a guy who at least is a guy who Fred Warner is a leader on the team who is smooth in front of the media. He knows how to talk. And so he handled it with aplomb as best as he could. Thanks, Luke. And, and I'm not going to put this just on the 49ers PR department. If John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan felt like it was important and it was a story that they wanted to get in front of, they wouldn't have put it on the 49ers PR department. They would have said, I want to come in and I want to talk. They would have had a conversation. They would have figured all this stuff out. They could have told us, we're going to take a break. We will be back in an hour or whatever. We were there. It was only 3:00 in the afternoon when practice was done. It wasn't even 3:00 in the afternoon when practice was done yesterday. It was done earlier than that. It was before 3:00 yesterday afternoon that we were done with all of the media responsibilities of the people that were there in terms of the players that they were going to allow us to see. They had plenty of time to work this out internally and have a press conference. Instead, they went on KMBR, which is team flagship station. Not going to rip KMBR. It's not their fault. They pay to play with the 49ers because the 49ers bring them money. Makes sense. And the 49ers knew what they were doing. The way that they've handled this allows them to say things without getting much pushback in the questions that they're going to receive back. And it's the way that it plays out. So we'll see what happens. Cosmo was asking, do I expect Trey Lance to play tomorrow? No, I don't expect Trey Lance to play tomorrow. They said that we're going to see a good amount of Brock Purdy, and we will see Sam Darnold. I think on top of that, Brandon Allen's going to get some run tomorrow. I would be very surprised to see Trey Lance in uniform. And if he is, good for him. And even more so, good for the 49ers for sticking with their guns and telling Trey Lance that he's going to be wherever he's going to be on that roster and he's going to dress and play. I think if Trey Lance plays for the 49ers tomorrow, that would be one of the stranger things that I've seen. East Coast Red and Gold podcast as a press conference for QB3, though. Trey Lance isn't just QB3. Trey Lance is a guy the 49ers invested their 3 first-round picks in. Trey Lance is a guy that a number of 49er fans saw in 2021 as the future of the franchise. Trey Lance has been a story all along. Trey Lance is going to be a story in San Francisco until he's gone. So to think that you can just get out of this being a story by not doing it, the stuff from the media, the pushback that the 49ers are getting right now is going to continue to grow, because what the 49ers did was they did their little deal, and now we don't get to see him today. John Lynch goes on the radio. Not going to be able to see him tomorrow until about 10 o'clock tomorrow night after the game. This all went down on Wednesday at 11:30, 11 o'clock. And they're going to not address it with the media that covers the team on a daily basis, where that people can actually ask them follow-up questions or maybe pressing questions. And they're not going to address it until after a game, 2.5 days later. Like, I understand being a fan of the team. I get it. I get it all. I just, Davis, thank you for the super chat. Says, with all due respect, the words "I feel bad" or "we owe Lance" should never be heard in football. I'm about to unsubscribe from a few channels soon. Davis, I agree with you. Now, I think this. I will say this: the "I feel bad." I don't think so. That one's so bad. Such a bad one. I think "I feel bad" can make sense because you can feel bad for the way things have worked out for Trey Lance, right? You can say that you feel bad that Trey Lance hasn't fulfilled all of his potential with the 49ers, or that he got injured last year for whatever reason you want to use, right? You can feel bad for him. I don't agree with "we owe Lance." The 49ers, nobody owes Lance anything. Nobody on earth is owed anything by anybody else. You get what you earn, right? Think about that for a second. I mean, do you walk into your office at work and tell your boss, "You owe me a raise. You owe me $5 more an hour"? The boss says, "No, I don't. I'll pay you what I'm paying you, or you can leave." And you either leave or you take what they're paying you. They don't owe you anything. They pay you more once you start producing, right? That's not the way life works. You're not owed anything. I have this conversation with my teenage son all the time, who's only 13 years old. Nobody owes you a damn thing. You have to work hard and earn it. I don't think the 49ers owe Trey Lance anything. They don't owe Trey Lance, releasing him. They don't owe Trey Lance the opportunity to play games. They don't owe Trey Lance, a certain number of snaps in order to prove himself. No, that's just not the way it is. Luke Walsh, member of the Toolbox, thank you very much for the super chat. Luke Walsh says, GMs are usually the bust, not the player. An NFL prospect isn't going to say, "No way, you should have picked me in the 5th round. I'm quitting football." Yeah, and that's accurate, right? That the GMs are the guys that are making the decisions. They're the ones that are making the mistakes on these guys. They're the ones that aren't getting it right. I said something on this channel a few days ago when I was talking with Larry Krueger, and I made a comment that Trey Lance. I don't remember exactly how I said it. I said something along the lines of Trey Lance. I might have, I don't know exactly what it was. It might have been something like he doesn't belong in the NFL at this point. That's not exactly what I was trying to say if it was. But for Trey Lance, I don't know if Trey Lance ever gets there, because I don't know if there's a team that in the NFL, man, you want to win games. You do, one way or another. And if there's a team that if there is a team that is willing to make Trey Lance their starting quarterback today, I don't know. I don't think that's a team that's wanting to win games, right? Trey Lance is a good quarterback. He's not that's a tough statement to make, maybe, but Trey Lance needs to play, and I don't see a spot in the NFL for Trey Lance to play. There was a nice tweet out today that I saw from a longtime sports writer, covers the NFL, longtime NFL writer, Jim Trotter. He put out a tweet this morning, and I feel like this was a good one. And he said, "I have no idea if Trey Lance will ever be a good NFL player, but I do believe he and other unproven players would have a greater chance of succeeding if NFL teams had a true developmental league. That was the tweet about 8 hours ago from Jim Trotter. I have no idea if Trey Lance will ever be a good NFL player, but I do believe he and other unproven players would have a greater chance of succeeding if NFL teams had a true developmental league. And I agree with this 1,000%. If there was a spot that Trey Lance could go play games and work on his craft, and I'm not saying like preseason games, I'm saying go out and play a game, play a full game, get those games that you missed in college, such as NFL Europe. You know, for you older folks, NFL Europe used to be called the World League of American Football, then became World NFL Europe. If that was around right now, that'd be the perfect spot. You know, Trock Talk says developmental league is college. Yes, to an extent. You know, Trey Lance kind of got caught in that middle, in that whole COVID thing, and it was his choice to leave. I think he had some bad advice to leave when he left. And he should have stayed. He should have played out his. If Trey Lance had played his entire college career, he'd be a rookie this season. Trey Lance was in the same recruiting class as Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the UCLA quarterback who just got drafted by the Cleveland Browns, that everybody, including myself, felt like would have been a good pickup of the 49ers. A guy who's playing really good. And difference is Dorian Thompson-Robinson played out his entire college career. Trey Lance had one amazing season in FCS, which is definitely not the Pac-12, and decided that because he was going to lose out on his next season due to COVID, that he was going to turn pro. And it's cost him. It's cost him. Gregorius Greg says, Jack, in your opinion, what do you believe is the most promising outlook for Trey Lance at this point in time? Right now, it would be to find a team that would make him their backup quarterback if it's not in San Francisco. I don't see a team that would be willing to make a trade for Trey Lance to make him their starter. I just don't think that that's the case. I don't think that's going to happen. So the most promising outlook for Trey Lance at this point in time right now is to find a team that's going to make him their backup. I think Trey Lance has the potential to be a solid NFL quarterback, to make plays. We've seen it. I feel like Trey Lance, if you watch the channel enough and you watch my film breakdown on Sunday of his performance against Denver, I felt like Trey Lance played a hell of a game against Denver. I felt like against the Raiders the week before, Trey Lance had struggled a little bit in the beginning and then figured it out and played pretty good down the end. I feel like Trey Lance this offseason has been the best version of Trey Lance we've ever seen. I think he has potential. He just needs to be in a place where he's given where he can compete. In San Francisco, the competition wasn't for the starting job. It was with Sam Darnold this year. And I was asked last night on Twitter, basically, you know, that I had made that comment about Lance's performance and why do I think the 49ers went in the other direction. I have no idea. Again, I don't watch all the film. Like, I don't know the playbook. I don't know what the coaching or what the coaches are exactly looking for. Perfect, right? I'm just looking what's going on. And I would have taken Trey Lance would be my backup quarterback right now. Z's asking Jack, what would you say if that was your son? I would tell him the same thing that I told my son. Life ain't fair. You're not owning anything. If you feel like they're wrong, that's okay. Go out there, prove them that they're wrong. Get back out there, take advantage of the opportunities that you're given, do the best thing that you can, the best you can do, and let the chips where they may. All you can do is control what you can control. You don't control everything. You can't control the decisions other people make. All you can do is control your reaction and what you do. And I feel like if I was Trey Lance, if it was my son, I would say, hey, man, you did everything you could. It didn't work out. Let's see what happens next. If the 49ers trade you, That's great. If you get stuck in San Francisco, that's fine. You're going to go out there and you're going to make the most of every day that you can, so that when the opportunity arises, you're going to step out there and you're going to be the best version of yourself that you can be. That's what I would say, because that's what I've already told my son, who was only a freshman in high school. And we have these conversations on an almost daily basis as he's competing to be a quarterback. Um, just looking through the comments to see if there was any others to bring up. You guys are awesome. We still got 182 people in the room. If you guys can do me a favor, hit that like button. That'd be fantastic. Trey may have been thinking he needed to secure financial stability for his family. He might have. You're right, Luke. I don't know. I don't know. And that may have been the case. I mean, his dad had a little bit of time with the 49ers at one point. But that could have been it. I don't think that Trey Lance I don't know his family life. I don't know if his family was in a need to secure financial stability right away. I don't know. And I don't want to put that on him. I don't know. That is a point. That's part of why you come out early, right? Is because you want to take advantage of that payday. They took advantage of the payday and it hasn't worked out for him, unfortunately. Look at Trey and Ambry, both affected by coming out. I think you might be talking about Ambry Thomas. I'm not sure on that one. Yeah, Taylor, Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, John Wolford sure feels like Tampa Bay is a place where Lance could get some run several weeks into the season. I agree. I think that, especially with Wolford, Kyle Trask, I think Lance could compete with him. Just depends on what happens there. Yeah, that was kind of goes along with what you said earlier, Luke. I think I caught your second comment on it. Tough decision. He'd be risking millions for next year at North Dakota State. I understand that, and I understand why a player like Trey Lance would take the opportunity when it presents itself. I really do. I do. It's just that in this case, he just needed more time. Well, here's the thing. This is a good comment by Ricardo. When Philly started Jalen, they didn't want to win. It took 3 years, but look at Jalen now. I'll take that all day, and they didn't give up all those assets. Here's the thing. How many games did Jalen Hurts play as a rookie? He didn't, right? Not until the end. Played like 3 or 4. The best thing that ever happened was Jalen Hurts is that they changed the coaches, and they got a coach that worked with his style. I think when the 49ers drafted Trey Lance, they thought they were going to get a guy that could do all the things that Jalen Hurts can do. Jalen Hurts and Trey Lance weren't in the same situations. Jalen Hurts had thousands of throws against high-level competition in college, against the best of the best in the NCAA. He was doing it at Alabama and Oklahoma against the best the NCAA has to offer. Trey Lance was playing with the Alabama against a team that was way better than everybody that they were playing against. There's a reason why Trey Lance didn't play the fourth quarter of like all but about 3 or 4 games during his time at North Dakota State. They were way better. There's a difference. That's the biggest difference. Jalen Hurts didn't play as much as a rookie. I think he made 3 or 4 starts at the end. They brought him back the next year. They had a good coaching staff. They were a work in progress. They were 9-8. Then they came back last year. Different situation, right? Difference was it in year 2 for Jalen Hurts? He didn't get hurt. That's the difference. Jalen Hurts didn't get hurt. That's the difference. Hurts left Alabama to advance his career. What's the difference with Trey? Hurts didn't leave Alabama to go to the NFL. Jalen Hurts left Alabama to go to Oklahoma. That's the big difference. That's the difference. Now, we'll find out where all this goes. We'll see where all this direction, where it all plays out. It's going to be, it's going to be fun to see what happens next week. Over this week, we'll find out, a little bit tomorrow. I was just checking something out that somebody had said in the comment section. That was a good one. Where are we? You guys got so many things over here. And this was a good comment too. I needed to pull this one up because it was a good one. Where was it? Talking about Jalen. Here we go. Not that one. There was a good comment over there about Jalen Hurts, and then I went to look it up to make sure you guys were right. And Cal Bear says Hurts played in 15 games, 4 starts in his rookie year. Yeah, 4 starts. Like I said, 15 games. He had 334 snaps total. If you go back and you look at Jalen Hurts' numbers throughout his rookie season, I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately. It would be interesting to go back and look at how many snaps he had per game, because there's a lot of people that talk about Trey Lance and the lack of starts that he had in San Francisco, right? Trey Lance, if you want to play the 15 games, 4 starts for in that rookie season for Jalen Hurts, remember Trey Lance as a rookie played in 6 games, right? Played in 6, made the 2 starts, played in parts of others. 15 is a lot more than 6. 178 snaps, so about half the snaps. Again, the biggest difference between the two is that Jalen Hurts didn't get hurt when he became the full-time starter, right? Always Drips. We win a team now, but going to rely on a rookie kicker. Hammer, make it make sense. If we win now, team sign Robbie Gould. Yeah, Robbie Gould, good kicker, very expensive kicker. That's the reason why he's not here. There's been a lot of talk about the 49ers and trying to save money with the quarterback position. I do think that there's a little bit to that, especially now. But you got to remember the 49ers, they were willing to take shots at Matthew Stafford. They were willing to take the shots at guys. The year that they drafted Trey Lance, they wanted to bring in Matthew Stafford, if you believe what Kyle Shanahan said. They're willing to spend the money at that position. There's always ways that you can get around it. Jack, some people want someone to be held accountable for the trade up and botching the quarterback position. Do you agree? If so, who do you think should be held accountable, and what does that look like? I don't know. How do you want to hold them accountable? Do you want to fire the head coach and general manager? I mean, the 49ers have been to the NFC Championship game or Super Bowl 3 of the last 4 years. Botching the quarterback position. Jimmy Garoppolo won a hell of a lot of games for the 49ers when he was healthy. When Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't healthy, the 49ers weren't that good. But when Jimmy Garoppolo was healthy, they won a lot of games. And then Brock Purdy won a lot of games. It seems like when the 49ers have a quarterback who is able to play, and by say able to play, I mean a good quarterback. Doesn't have to necessarily be the greatest, doesn't have to be anything. But when the 49ers have a competent quarterback, they win a lot of games, right? So maybe it's about having competent quarterback play. And the 49ers got that with Jimmy Garoppolo for all of 2019, a majority of 2021, a little bit in 2022 when he was healthy. They didn't get it in 2018. That was 2020, the COVID year. I think he was 3-3. I mean, um, what do you want to do? This is I see this all the time. This comment right here. This is content creator fodder right here. Somebody's got to be held accountable. You got to hold them accountable. They're winning games. They'll be held accountable when they stop winning. Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch will be held accountable when they stop winning games. That's when they'll be held accountable for mistakes. Until then, as long as they keep winning, they're not going to be held accountable. That's the way professional sports works, is guys get held accountable when they don't win. Your job isn't in the NFL, your job in Major League Baseball is to win games. Football and sports are all about meritocracy. The best guys play. And Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch aren't going to be held accountable. There's nothing to hold them accountable for. What the fuck are they holding? Why are we holding them accountable? Because they win? Because they don't play the quarterback you think that they should play? They need to be held accountable? I mean, come on, man. Really? Really? I agree, Chasing Bay. I agree. The holding accountable narrative is dumb. I also think that there's only one or two guys that are willing to tell the truth. Only a couple of guys that are willing to hold the 49ers accountable is also dumb. It's dumb. You can ask pointed questions. You can hold them accountable when they don't win games. I find it funny when the 49ers continue to win that people want to hold them accountable. What do we hold them accountable for? Winning games? Justin Lomker says, how is a guy who threw 30 yards in a game last year with 2 picks better than Lance? Hey, you're talking about Sam Darnold's last game of the season. I agree. Again, I don't know. I don't know. The way that I saw it is, before we talk about, like, let me just back up instead of going through everything that happened. Let's go to the starting point. And the starting point of Sam Darnold be signed. Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, before the OTA, before off-season program worked out, you can say this about these two guys. Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, both third-round picks. Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, two guys that had traits that helped them become the third pick in the draft. Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, two guys who had not fulfilled that potential in the NFL. Trey Lance, different from Sam Darnold in that one of the main reasons he hadn't fulfilled that potential is because he'd been injured so much over his first 2 seasons. That's the difference, right? And so when I looked at them prior to the off-season program, what I said quite often on here was that they're very similar players. Two guys who were coming from very similar places to start this process off. Sam Darnold, a little bit more experience, what have you. I watched them throughout. Like I said, I watched the whole way through. I don't think that Sam Darnold was the better choice. I can understand why somebody watching them would take Sam Darnold, because watching them play, the aesthetics of watching Sam Darnold and Trey Lance play, Sam Darnold just looked better. But you look at the results, and the results weren't better. Trey Lance did some really good things against the Raiders. Had some bad plays, obviously. Definitely a tough start. Definitely got better. Trey Lance was much better in the second game. So, Justin Houston is not an option for the 49ers. He is a member of the Carolina Panthers. He already signed as a free agent. Christopher says Sam has never been to the playoffs and is a loser quarterback over his NFL career. It's okay to think he's not a good option. Lee Ving says that Sam will be fine in an ultra-controlled Kyle offense for a game or two. If it comes to that, Trey would still need reps and time. I don't know, man. Like I said, I watched them play the last 2 preseason games, and there wasn't much of a difference between Sam Darnold and Trey Lance. It just wasn't a much difference. I think that you game plan it out, and go from there. And I think it would have been interesting. The Awesome says, what results weren't better, Jack? Stop lying. I'm not lying. The one area, if you want to point to one single area in which Trey Lance was behind, it's in the red zone. The performance in the red zone is really, I think, was the one big difference between Lance and Sam Darnold. It's also what separated Brock Purdy from everybody else. It's what separated Brock Purdy in his time with the 49ers from Jimmy Garoppolo. It's what separated Brock Purdy from Trey Lance, is his ability to make plays in the red zone, put points on the board. Beyond that, I felt like you watch the games and you watch Trey Lance and you watch the way that he moved the team and he did really good. You watch him in the red zone. It's just a different game in the red zone, right? It's a little bit different. Things happen very quick in the NFL everywhere, but you get down to the red zone, now everything's constricted and you have less room to work. And so the ball's got to come out quicker. So I think that plays a role into it too. So, I don't know. So that's it. I'm gonna end now. I've been doing this for about an hour and 17 minutes. I think it is time to call it. I want to say thanks to everybody for tuning in. Hey, if you like what I said, great. If you didn't, that's fine. Take everything I say for what it's worth. You're getting it. I appreciate all you tuning in. If you guys can do me a favor, please do this. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed to the channel. And last but not least, make sure that you hit your notification button. Turn on your notifications so you know every time that I go live. I will be back tomorrow. I will be joined by Larry Kruger tomorrow at 11. I'm sure we'll be breaking down the Trey Lance situation more. We will also be talking about the game coming up tomorrow night against the Los Angeles Chargers, the 49ers' third and final preseason game. I cannot wait to get to September 10th and get this regular season going. There's a few folks over in the comment section that talked about Nick Bosa. Got to get Nick Bosa signed. I think I agree with you. That is 100% the truth. And then also got a lot of positivity. You guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Keep it locked in for all your 49ers news and notes. Get the 49ers.pressdemocrat.com too. Thanks. Subscribe, like,